The company lawyer publicly laughed when I asked for severance. No woman negotiates severance here. My attorney circled clause 12b. The CFO's coffee hit the floor. Danielle knew the numbers didn't lie, but the people pushing them sure as hell did. It started on a Tuesday morning with one of those pep rally meetings where they serve stale donuts and corporate delusion. The new VP of Finance, Tyler, fresh off his MBA and probably still smelling like Axe body spray, was waving around a slide deck like he'd cured cancer. Revenue up 18%, margin stable, no risk factors, all sunshine and boner pill optimism. Danielle, sitting in the back with her notebook and 12 years of institutional memory, raised one eyebrow, because she knew those numbers were wrong. Not oopsie wrong, not forgot to carry the one wrong. They were strategically massaged like a Vegas call girl during convention week. Line items had been shifted, forecasts inflated, risk disclosures conveniently trimmed. She flagged two in her margin. One projection showed a vendor contract that had expired 6 weeks ago. Another listed deferred maintenance expenses that had magically vanished. She raised her hand, calmly, even smiled. Just wondering, she said, if legal reviewed these figures before they went to the board. Tyler gave her that patronizing smirk, half frat boy, half gas station Buddha. Thanks, Danielle, he said, but we're all good. They weren't. She knew it. The same way you know when milk's turned before the sell-by date. The stench of overpromised quarterly growth and underreported liability was all over that deck. But Danielle didn't push. Not yet. She'd learned her lesson years ago. Don't interrupt the show until the spotlight hits you. So she filed her notes, went back to her desk, and quietly started saving backup copies of everything she could find. Now, before we go any further, yeah, you. One listening while driving, folding laundry, or hiding from your kids in the garage. 97% of y'all don't subscribe. That number's uglier than Tyler's accounting. If you want to hear how Danielle makes this entire boardroom piss their pants in part 6, hit that follow button. It costs you nothing. But for our team, it means we can keep exposing corporate BS with a smirk and a middle finger. Anyway, Danielle, 12 years in compliance. She was the kind of woman who never missed a decimal, never gossiped, never cried at her desk. HR called her low maintenance. Leadership called her reliable. Both meant we'll never promote you, but God help us if you quit. And Danielle knew her value. She was the duct tape holding this rusted machine together. She kept the OSHA violations from stacking, the SEC inquiries from arriving, and the idiot C-suite from emailing each other things that could be subpoenaed. Because she didn't wear heels that clicked or speak in LinkedIn aphorisms, she was invisible until she wasn't. Tyler's arrival marked a shift. Suddenly the CFO stopped answering her emails. Reports she used to review before board submissions started bypassing her. The air got thin. HR started using phrases like streamlining workflows and realigning compliance under finance. Danielle saw the writing on the wall. It was in Comic Sans written by idiots, but still she didn't panic. She archived every policy revision, every quarterly adjustment, every sign-off chain, including one little gem she'd slipped in back in 2017 during a compliance overhaul no one cared about. Clause 12b, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. For now, Danielle sat in her cubicle, sipped lukewarm coffee from her world's okayest risk manager mug, and listened to the whispers travel down the hallway like smoke before a fire. Because something was coming. And Danielle, she wasn't ready. She was prepared. They called it a Q2 alignment meeting, which was corporate for bring your own news. Danielle knew it before she even sat down. The energy in the room had that weird sterile buzz, like a dentist's office where someone already screamed. The CFO, Brad, mid-50s, hair transplanted from Satan's carpet, opened with a rehearsed grin and started talking about margin preservation and operational fluidity. Translation. Bodies are about to hit the floor. Tyler, the accented VP, was standing behind him with his arms crossed like a frat bro at a funeral. Danielle counted 3 slides before the ambush. And in the spirit of long-term fiscal sustainability, Brad droned. We've made some difficult decisions. As of today, we'll be restructuring certain non-revenue departments to streamline overhead. She didn't flinch. She just set her pen down and waited. That's when Brad's eyes flicked to her like he was about to ask her to turn in her hall pass. Danielle, he said, trying to soften it with a tilt of his head. Your position will be absorbed under finance effective immediately. We appreciate your many years of service. Absorbed, she repeated like she was taste testing the word for poison. Yes, he said, you'll be provided with an offboarding packet and assistance in the transition. She blinked once. Is there a severance? That question stopped the room cold. The company's in-house lawyer, Rick, buttoned down half undone like he got dressed in the dark and ran on smugness alone, actually laughed. Not politely. Not awkwardly. A real chesty chuckle like someone had told him women could vote. Oh, Danielle, he said, shaking his head like she'd asked for a unicorn. No woman negotiates severance here. There it was, the sentence, the one that would echo in Danielle's skull like a shotgun blast in a church. She said nothing. Not to Rick, not to Brad, not to Tyler, who couldn't make eye contact. She just looked down at the notebook in her lap, still open to her margin notes from the last board report, and quietly closed it. HR showed up 3 minutes later with a manila envelope and a security badge already deactivated. Younger woman named Laura mumbled something about next steps while offering Danielle a cardboard box and the world's most insincere smile. "Let us know if you need help carrying anything." Danielle didn't answer. She packed slowly, intentionally removed her diplomas from the wall, unpinned a faded sticky note that said check clause 12B may need it someday, slid it into her purse like a loaded round. They didn't even offer a handshake. She walked out under flickering fluorescent lights, past the display case of dusty corporate awards, past the break room where someone had already taken her mug. The world kept spinning like she hadn't just been erased. But beneath the silence, her fury curled its fingers around her throat like a hot wire. Not loud, not messy, just tight enough to focus her breathing. They thought she'd fold. That's the thing about men like Brad and Rick and Tyler. They don't see women like Danielle until their whole foundation cracks open and swallows them. They think silence means surrender. They never imagine it means strategy. The first night, Danielle didn't cry. She just sat at her chipped Formica kitchen table in sweatpants that still smelled like office carpet and stared at the severance packet, if you could even call 2 pages of vague HR jargon and a signature line a packet. It sat on the table like a dead animal. Next to it, a half-empty box of Francia, a microwave burrito, and the kind of silence that hums just loud enough to remind you you're completely alone. She poured another glass. Watched the wine dribble down like transmission fluid. Bitter metallic, fitting. Her cat Midge jumped on the counter and knocked over a pen. Danielle didn't flinch. Maybe this was it. Maybe she was done. 12 years of being dependable. Never missing a filing. Cleaning up after every executive oopsie like some corporate janitor with a law degree. And for what? A cardboard box. A security escort. And a final insult that made her feel like she'd just been told to shut up and smile. She looked at the envelope again. Inside was a line. By signing, you agree to forfeit any and all claims related to your employment or termination. The legal equivalent of, take your crumbs and be grateful. She took a sip. Stared at the condensation dripping down her glass. Her finger traced the water trail, mind drifting, back to the old days, back when no one gave a damn what compliance did, so she rebuilt it from scratch, quietly, thoroughly, and slipped in protections no one noticed because no one thought she mattered. And that's when it hit her. Clause 12B, she said it aloud, a whisper at first. Clause 12B. It had been a rainy Wednesday back in 17. The CFO at the time, before Brad, was too busy golfing with auditors to review anything longer than a tweet. Danielle had restructured their entire risk policy that month. Tucked into the back pages of a 40-page document was a clause that triggered severance and triple back pay if her restructuring followed a material misstatement of financial projections. At the time, it was insurance. Nothing more? Now? It might be a noose, for them. She set down her glass, walked to the living room, pulled out the battered fireproof box under her TV stand. Inside were 2 thumb drives labeled Archive and SIA. She plugged one into her laptop, fingers trembling. Memos, forecast versions, time-stamped Excel files, emails with track changes. Her heartbeat slowed. This wasn't hope. This was ammo, and she knew exactly who to call. She hadn't spoken to Marcy in over a year. Life, distance, the usual. But Marcy had been her roommate in law school. Fierce, brilliant, the kind of woman who once cross-examined a campus cop for giving her a parking ticket. Now she was a partner at a boutique employment law firm that specialized in corporate screw-ups. Danielle didn't overthink it. She just dialed. Danielle Hartman, Marcy answered, voice sharp as ever. Please tell me you're calling for a girls' weekend and not revenge. Danielle took a breath. Little bit of both, she said, but mostly revenge. She could hear Marcy smirk. Me everything. And so Danielle did, slowly, carefully, file by file, phrase by phrase, and when she got to clause 12B there was a pause, a long one. Send me the language, Marcy finally said, right now. Danielle did. And the next words Marcy spoke made the wine glass shake in her hand. Oh honey, she said, this clause, this isn't a firecracker. It's a goddamn thermonuclear warhead, and you've been sitting on it for 7 years. Danielle looked at the severance envelope again, then picked it up, and dropped it directly into the trash. Marcy called back the next morning before the sun was up. Danielle was in a robe, hair half twisted, coffee cup clutched like a weapon. She hadn't slept, not really, just drifted in and out, haunted by spreadsheets and the sound of Rick's laugh echoing in her skull like a jackhammer on linoleum. Clause 12B, Marcy said, skipping hello. I read it 5 times. Danielle, it's airtight. If their quarterly report contains anything even close to a misstatement, and you are restructured afterward, they owe you everything. Not just severance. We're talking back pay, damages, attorney's fees. Danielle didn't smile. Not yet. She just said, then let's begin. Marcy's voice dropped an octave. We'll do this clean. No press. No warning. Let's make them think you went quietly into that good HR night. And just like that, machine roared to life. Danielle pulled out every thumb drive, every encrypted zip file, every one-off-the-record memo she'd ever hoarded under the doctrine of cover your ass. It was like going through her own digital black box. She had audit trails, email threads, metadata so old it still referenced Windows 7. If someone so much as sneezed near a spreadsheet, Danielle had the timestamp. Marcy built a secure folder, organized everything by date, topic, executive signature. She was surgical, no fluff, no vengeance in tone, just hard evidence laced with quiet venom. They cross-referenced Danielle's termination date against the company's Q1 and Q2 earnings reports, flagged 4 discrepancies, 3 omitted disclosures, and 1 absolutely damning forecast note that had been accidentally revised post-filing. That one made Marcy say, "Jesus." Danielle just sipped her coffee. Next came the legal chess moves. Marcy filed what she called a quiet signal, a formal inquiry delivered via courier, with the elegance of a razor in an envelope. No threats, just a precise legal question. In light of publicly adjusted earnings and the timeline of my client's termination, we request clarification on whether Clause 12B applies retroactively under your firm's current restructuring policy. Sent directly to the company's legal department. CC'd to the board. BCC'd to a friendly arbitration officer they knew had zero tolerance for corporate theater. Danielle's name wasn't on it. Not yet. And still, within 48 hours, they got their first response. A short, vague email from HR. "We'd be happy to reopen discussions regarding Ms. Hartman's exit package. Perhaps we can find a resolution that benefits all parties." Translation. They knew something was coming. Marcy snorted when she read it. Brad and Rick just realized the bomb under their table is ticking. Danielle didn't answer. She was scrolling through her inbox from 6 months ago, hunting for a draft she remembered flagging. Found it. A CFO memo about growth forecasting where someone had commented, "Adjust language here, too risky to disclose debt restructuring." That memo had been signed by Rick. With his usual idiot flourish, "Looks good, send it up." Danielle saved it to the folder. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt clinical. Each file wasn't revenge, it was dissection. A cold, meticulous postmortem of how men in had written her off because she didn't shout in meetings or swing her weight around with golf metaphors. She didn't need a driver. She had documentation. And now, with Marcy steering the ship in Clause 12B strapped to the mast like dynamite, Danielle stepped fully into the fight. Not loud. Not public. But with terrifying precision. And not one of them had any clue what was coming. The first call came in at 9:13 a.m. on a Thursday. Danielle didn't answer. She was watching reruns of Chopped with a legal pad on her lap, jotting notes about timestamp chains while a guy in a bow tie tried to turn pickled squid into dessert. Her phone buzzed again. Then again. HR must have thought persistence was the same thing as leverage. They finally left a voicemail. "Hi, Danielle. This is Trina from Employee Experience. We wanted to revisit your exit paperwork and explore some mutually beneficial solutions. If you're open to a short discussion, we'd love to click." Danielle forwarded it to Marcy with the subject line. "The dance begins." Marcy's reply came 20 minutes later. No small talk. No emojis. A 12-page memo, co-signed by 2 other attorneys, outlining their position with citations, precedent, 3 subpoenas attached for financial disclosures, internal communications regarding Danielle's termination, and the revision logs of the last 3 quarterly reports. The cover letter was a masterpiece of legal snark. "In the spirit of mutual benefit, we've enclosed documentation that may help clarify our standing." Danielle read it twice and smiled. It wasn't joy. It was something deeper, older, like the sound of ice cracking on a frozen lake. By noon, silence broke. A single text lit up her phone. "Unknown number. They're panicking. CFO said you had the nuke." She stared at the message, reread it once, twice, then typed back slowly. "Danielle, who is this? Unknown number. You helped me fix my expense reports when Tyler wanted me to hide a vendor over age. I never forgot. Just be careful. They're calling lawyers. They're meeting late, like real late." Danielle exhaled, sat back, and finally let herself. Wasn't loud, more like a ghost escaping her throat, because now she had something Rick, Brad, and every man in that boardroom would never understand. Someone on the inside who still gave a damn. She didn't respond again. Didn't have to. She just opened a new folder on her laptop. Whistleblower threads. Then she got dressed. Nice jeans, blazer, no makeup. Drove to the library like it was any other day. Found a quiet room, plugged in, and started digging deeper. Inside archived inboxes, she found a treasure trove. Rick had a habit of forwarding sensitive reports to his personal Gmail for weekend review. Sloppy, lazy. But lucky for Danielle, who'd copied the original server logs before she was terminated, Marcy flagged a few entries with the enthusiasm of a shark sniffing blood in the pool. "This right here? This shows he reviewed the projection edit after the board presentation. That means the misstatement wasn't an oversight. Was a conscious decision to mislead. Is that enough for Clause 12b? Danielle asked, pretending she didn't already know the answer. Oh sweetheart, Marcy said. It's enough for Clause 12b and a feature in Forbes if we wanted to go public. But they didn't. That was the plan. Quiet, surgical. Make them twist. By Friday, HR called again. This time the voicemail used new language, final opportunity to resolve in good faith. Danielle didn't bother forwarding it. She just wrote down the date, the time, and underlined the phrase final opportunity. Because what they didn't know was that her opportunity hadn't even started yet. And the fuse already lit. The quarterly report dropped like a church bulletin on a Sunday. Dull cover, polite formatting, the usual accounting lullabies. But Danielle flipped straight to the back. That's where the real sins live. The footnotes. Page 37. Subsection 4c. Subsequent to our Q1 filing, management determined prior projections did not account for deferred liabilities associated with equipment leasing transitions. Adjustments have been made to reflect a more accurate picture of revenue growth. She didn't even blink. That sentence, sterile, buried, likely COPA pasted from a lawyer's panic attack, was the exact tripwire in Clause 12b, material misstatement of financial projections resulting in structural or departmental realignment. Check. Danielle sent the screenshot to Marcy. One word followed. Go. The arbitration request was submitted by noon. Neutral venue, private setting, no press, that was key. Danielle didn't want fireworks, she wanted autopsies. They chose a conference room in a downtown law firm. Glass walls, minimalist art, fake succulents that looked exhausted from pretending. The air conditioning was aggressive, some paralegals' passive-aggressive protest against summer. At 9:58 a.m., Danielle arrived in a slate-gray blazer and steal your eyes. She didn't carry a briefcase, just a slim folder labeled Clause 12b Final. Marcy came in behind her, hair pulled back tight, expression somewhere between courtroom elegance and predator. At 10:02 a.m., the door opened again. Rick walked in first, fake grin locked in place like it had been spray-painted on. Still wore the same scuffed loafers, the kind of man who always bought cheap and thought confidence could hide incompetence. Behind him came Brad, the CFO. He looked pale, sweaty, like he hadn't slept in 3 days because he hadn't. The whispers inside the company had gotten louder. Some said lawsuit. Others said SEC, but Brad only heard one word over and over, clause. 2 board members entered behind them. Older men in expensive watches with expressions like, why are we even here? Danielle didn't stand, didn't speak. She just looked at the clock. 10:05, Marcy cleared her throat. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to begin by referencing an internal document you're all familiar with, Clause 12b of the Corporate Compliance Policy, revised 2017. Rick chuckled. We're aware of your interpretation. But Marcy held up one finger. Not interpretation, she said. Application. She reached into her briefcase and slid a printed copy of the quarterly report across the table, page 37 circled in red. Then with the other hand, she slid Danielle's original compliance revision behind it, Clause 12b highlighted in yellow, bolded with her initials in the margin. Rick's smirk stalled. Brad's mouth twitched. The room fell into a strange silence, not confusion, not protest, recognition. They'd seen this coming. They just hoped she wouldn't pull the trigger. Marcy leaned forward, elbows on the table like she was adjusting the scope on a rifle. This revision constitutes a material misstatement. You filed projections that ignored known liabilities, which triggered departmental realignment, specifically the termination of my client. Under Clause 12b, that action entitles her to severance, triple damages, full legal compensation. Rick opened his mouth again, this time slower. Even if the clause applies, Marcy held up another sheet, a company email from 6 weeks prior. From Brad, timestamped, I'm aware this report doesn't reflect lease obligations. We'll massage that in Q2. Silence again. But now it wasn't calm. It was reckoning. One of the board members, gray suit, gold pen, finally cleared his throat. What is it you're asking for? Danielle didn't speak. Marcy did full enforcement of Clause 12b, settlement of damages totaling $1.47 million, a formal letter acknowledging wrongful restructuring, and a confidentiality agreement signed within 10 business days. Brad looked like he might puke. Rick tried to laugh again. It came out like a cough. And Danielle, she just sat still, calm, thunderous, silent, because the moment had arrived and she didn't need to scream to make it shake the walls. The silence shattered first with the sound of porcelain hitting marble. Brad's coffee mug, branded with some tacky corporate slogan, slipped right through his sweaty fingers, spraying lukewarm Americano across the polished floor. No one moved. The spill spread outward like an accusation, pooling at his feet. Rick's face flushed from pale disbelief to an ugly shade of crimson. His mouth opened and closed twice without sound, like a goldfish discovering glass. This was the man who'd laughed at Clause 12b, dismissed it as some compliance chick's HR fantasy. Now his ignorance sat on the table, printed and highlighted, mocking him. Danielle didn't say a word. Her silence was deafening. Finally, one of the board members, a heavy-set man named Arthur with jowls that wobbled when he spoke, turned toward Brad. "Is this accurate? Did we actually file misleading projections?" Brad stumbled through words, his voice thin as tissue paper. "There was context, maybe certain adjustments." Marcy leaned forward, voice sharp enough to cut diamonds. "Misstatements, not adjustments." Rick tried regaining composure. "We acknowledge a potential misunderstanding here," he said, fumbling his pen like a man disarming a bomb. "Perhaps a resolution." Rick coughed, glancing nervously at Brad. "We're prepared to offer Miss Hartman a settlement of 2 months' salary. Consider it a goodwill gesture to close this quickly." 2 months. Danielle didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't so much as tilt her head. She'd waited too long, endured too much, to dignify that insult with a reaction. Her calm was as deadly as cyanide in a champagne glass. Marcy didn't miss a beat. 2 months' salary, she repeated slowly, tasting every word as though it were rotten fruit. "Interesting offer. Clause 12B explicitly entitles my client to triple damages, retroactive back pay from the date of wrongful termination, attorney's fees, and a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing. 2 months doesn't cover the ink on this filing." Arthur cleared his throat, face turning grim. "Triple damages? Isn't that a bit aggressive?" Marcy didn't blink. "Your CFO's email shows deliberate intent to conceal liabilities. That's not aggressive, gentlemen, it's fraudulent." Was sweating now, a dark stain spreading beneath his armpits. "Let's not get inflammatory." Marcy leaned back, steepling her fingers with an assassin's patience. "I'm simply stating facts. Fraud has implications beyond financial damages. SEC exposure, class action vulnerabilities, shareholder lawsuits. Shall I continue?" Danielle watched Brad's eyes dart around the room, hunting for escape. Rick's smirk was long gone, replaced with something far more satisfying. The other board member, younger and visibly annoyed, finally spoke. "What's the number then? What does Miss Hartman need to make this disappear quietly?" Marcy slid another sheet of paper across the table with clinical precision. 1.47 million, inclusive of attorney fees. Confidentiality signed immediately. Formal acknowledgement letter delivered by Friday. Arthur looked at Brad like he'd happily shove him off a cliff to end this. Brad sputtered. "Need time to discuss?" 48 hours, Marcy said, standing slowly and buttoning her blazer. "Then we file publicly, with exhibits." The words dropped into the room like ice cubes into whiskey heavy sharp final. Rick looked ill. Brad stared at his coffee puddle. Arthur pinched the bridge of his nose. Danielle remained utterly still. She knew exactly how this ended. They'd stall. They'd squirm. They'd threaten. And then, inevitably, they'd fold. Because while she'd played chess, played checkers, carelessly, arrogantly, and badly. Marcy glanced once at Danielle, a flicker of triumph behind her polished professionalism. Danielle met her gaze and offered the faintest, quietest nod, because the game was already over. The board just didn't know it yet. Danielle knew they wouldn't surrender without one last ugly twist. Men like Brad and Rick didn't lose gracefully. They clawed at the edge even when the battle was already lost. So, when the phone calls slowed, the silence didn't fool her. It only sharpened her senses. She knew what came next, the waiting game. They drag out arbitration, stretching every deadline, filing meaningless motions, burying her team in stacks of deliberately useless documents. A classic corporate stall tactic, designed to exhaust her emotionally, financially, legally. They underestimated her patience. Then came the whispers. Marcy heard them first. Calls from old colleagues. Professional gossip seeded like weeds in well-kept gardens. Rumors about Danielle's performance. Anonymous HR leaks suggesting incompetence, compliance irregularities that conveniently surfaced only now. The smear campaign was subtle enough to seem credible, poisonous enough to spread quietly. Marcy was furious. Danielle was calm. Because desperation smelled exactly like this. "They're painting you as the disgruntled ex-employee," Marcy warned one morning, her voice edged with irritation. "Classic narrative. Let 'em," Danielle said, voice steady as granite. "We have Clause 12B, they have gossip." She could feel their panic escalating through every stalled hearing, every request for additional review, every pathetic attempt to rewrite history. They thought silence meant surrender, thought her composure masked weakness. They couldn't fathom it was exactly the opposite, a carefully sharpened blade, ready to swing at the right moment. And then her phone buzzed one evening late, as rain streaked down her apartment windows. Another unknown number, short and cryptic. "Check-in box, final gift, good luck." Danielle opened her laptop slowly, like unwrapping a fragile package. In her inbox was a forwarded email thread marked simply last nail. Use carefully. Her heart rate didn't quicken. Her breathing stayed even. It was a detailed exchange. Brad, Rick, and Tyler discussing the quarterly report just before her termination. The subject line alone was damning. Revenue projections, urgent edits required. She scrolled slowly, meticulously, savoring each word of their incrimination. "Brad, we can't submit these numbers without revision." We're exposed if anyone digs deeper. Rick, adjust where necessary. Board won't question it. Tyler, what about compliance? Brad, already handled. Danielle won't be an issue after Thursday. She exhaled softly, closed her eyes. Let the quiet fire burn through her, cold and pure. They had buried themselves sentence by sentence, email by email. She forwarded it to Marcy with a single line, courtesy copy to SEC. Marcy's reply was instant, already drafting. By the next morning, the email thread, complete with a polite, anonymous tip, landed gently in the inbox of every board member, with a perfectly timed CC to the SEC's general tip line. Danielle waited. It didn't take long. Within hours, her phone lit up again, this time Marcy's voice rich with satisfaction. They've called an emergency board meeting. Tonight at 6. No postponements, no extensions. They're done. Danielle's reply was barely above a whisper, smooth and unhurried. Good. At 6:14 p.m., Marcy texted one last message. They folded. Settlement confirmed. CFO on indefinite leave. Lawyer terminated. Check tomorrow. Danielle read it twice, then closed her laptop quietly, walked to her kitchen, poured herself a glass of wine, this time a bottle with a cork, no boxes tonight, and took a long, slow sip. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights blurred softly, glowing through the windowpane. Danielle breathed deeply, letting the silent triumph fill her veins, settling into her bones. Because victory didn't need fanfare or applause, quiet was enough. The conference room was cold, sterile, and unbearably quiet. Danielle sat at the polished oak table, her expression unreadable, posture perfect, hands calmly folded in her lap. She wore her sharpest blazer, black tailored slacks, and the kind of subtle confidence that made men like Brad squirm uncomfortably in their overpriced chairs. Marcy sat beside her, folders neatly stacked, her pen poised like a surgeon's scalpel, ready for any last-minute objections. There weren't any. Across from them sat Arthur, looking decades older than he had weeks before, his eyes fixed wearily on the settlement papers laid out before him. Beside him, Brad was conspicuously absent, replaced by an empty chair and a sad, untouched bottle of water. Rick's chair was empty too. A small white envelope lay neatly in front of it, marked simply, termination, effective immediately. Arthur cleared his throat and glanced toward Danielle, avoiding her eyes. We've agreed to your terms. All documentation has been prepared. We just need signatures. Danielle didn't move, didn't speak, she didn't even nod. Instead, Marcy picked up the pen, signing elegantly beneath the carefully typed words. Triple damages, retroactive pay, full confidentiality, formal acknowledgement of wrongful restructuring. Each word was crisp, clean, and devastating. Arthur sighed heavily as he signed, his pen scraping against paper in the crushing silence. When finished, he slid the documents across the table gently, as though pushing away something toxic. He finally looked Danielle in the eyes, briefly, apologetically, then turned away. Danielle took the check and the signed contract carefully, slipping them both neatly into her folder. She rose slowly, deliberately, still without uttering a single word. Her silence wasn't passive. It radiated power, composure, absolute control. Marcy stood beside her, gathering her papers with a satisfied, professional ease. Together they walked toward the door, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive stillness. Outside, in the polished hallway, the elevator doors opened smoothly, silently. Danielle stepped inside, Marcy right behind her, pressing the button for the lobby. The doors slid shut, sealing them both in reflective chrome and quiet triumph. Marcy finally broke the silence, letting out a slow breath. You okay? Danielle smiled, gently but unmistakably, for the first time in months. She looked into Marcy's reflection, voice calm, firm, and quietly lethal. No woman negotiates severance here, Danielle echoed softly. She paused just long enough for Marcy to smile back. Guess I just did. The elevator descended quietly, efficiently, just like Danielle had executed every step of this battle. When the doors opened, she stepped confidently into the bright, sunlit lobby, shoulders back, chin high, fully vindicated. Outside, the city buzzed with afternoon life, busy, loud, unaware. Danielle didn't hesitate, stepping into the sunlight, feeling its warmth seep gently through her skin. She didn't need applause, recognition, or even acknowledgement. She had exactly what she'd come for: quiet victory, absolute dignity, and the certainty that, at long last, the invisible woman had finally made them see. What stands out most here is the power of being quietly prepared. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't explosive. It's silent, precise, and utterly irrefutable. True career justice often comes from a deep understanding of the system, patience, and the courage to let facts speak louder than fury.